Sachit Kamat, Chief Product Officer at Eightfold AI, an AI native talent intelligence platform, joins us in this HR Tech Talk episode to chat about the various optimization tips HR teams should keep in mind as they infuse AI into most, if not all, of their everyday HR practices. A big welcome to you, Sachit. It's so good to have you here, and thank you for taking the time to do this. I'm sure you have a busy day and it's the middle of the week, but it's always exciting to have these conversations because we are at a time in the HR tech landscape where there's a lot of evolution, a lot of complaints as well, with too much automation, job seekers, and that disconnect between job seekers and the brands they want to work with. So these conversations are always very interesting to have, to put out there, so that both end users as well as companies who are adopting these technologies can keep optimizing as innovations come into the market. So thank you for doing this. Thank you for taking the time. Before we dive in, we'd love to get to know you. We'd love the audience to know more about Sachit. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey in tech and your role at Eightfold AI?
Yeah, sounds good. First of all, thank you for having me on your podcast. It's always great to have these conversations. So I'm Sachit. I'm the Chief Product Officer here at Eightfold. And, effectively, I've spent a good chunk of my career broadly in the technology space, right? Having worked in the consumer space at companies like LinkedIn and Uber, and then obviously in the enterprise space as well, serving some of the largest Fortune 500 companies in the world, which are, primarily the customer base that Eightfold serves. And yeah, the best way I could put it is I've been involved in building some of the products that people may use on an everyday basis, whether it's the LinkedIn profile, whether it's the Uber app, where I was involved in building the payment systems. And at Eightfold, we serve, effectively both the job seekers as well as the companies that are trying to hire these job seekers. So definitely on the subject that we're going to talk about today, have a lot of perspectives. My role at the company basically involves deciding what to invest in, what products to build as we serve basically both sides of the marketplace. And then it's also figuring out how to continuously evolve in a world that is changing around us very, very quickly.
Absolutely. So, what's been very interesting across the HR tech landscape today is the AI layer. I think every upcoming product is more focused on how AI is enhancing their product and their features. But essentially, when it comes to the end users, I think I'm not sure whether you're feeling the same thing or the same sentiments across the global landscape. There's a lot of there is a growing disconnect between what HR tech is supposed to do and how it's supposed to benefit both the brand and job seekers out there, because a lot of job seekers have started coming to this conclusion that automation is ruining the hiring cycle in a lot of ways. And probably, of course, there's a benefit to it as well. But I think there's a lot of optimization and streamlining that still needs to be done at the adoption level so that both parties can benefit, effectively. So, and then let's take a small step back first. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Eightfold AI's latest agentic AI capabilities, and especially how it affects end users from both sides of the coin, the job seeker and the brand who's adopting the two.
Yeah, so the best way I could put it, right, is that like Eightfold is a company that has been in the AI space for the better part of a decade at this point. And effectively, we started out by building out the intelligence layer of trying to figure out for any given job in the world, who are the right people to target in the first place, right? Many of the companies we serve sit on millions of people's profiles and their resumes, in terms of people that have previously engaged with them. And so how, basically making sense of who should they be going after for any position is the first problem we solved. Over the last few years, the innovation has now moved from the intelligence to the actual action of taking action on this data, by basically building agents that can go out and connect with these folks, interview them, which is effectively areas that we have invested in. We now have people that are effectively doing millions of these interviews on Eightfold's platform, right? Where there are autonomous interviewers that are effectively connecting with job seekers and effectively evaluating them for these different roles as well. And then on the candidate side, we have agents that effectively help the candidates discover the right jobs, effectively apply for these jobs, and then actually interview within the same session, right? So effectively, automation that exists on both sides of the house. Now, this technology has evolved quite a bit, right? So effectively, we are obviously targeting simplifying the process down, reducing the time it takes for these companies to hire, and then also making it a much more delightful experience on the job seeker side as well. There's a lot more to be done. And obviously, there is obviously a situation here where there is still friction that exists on both sides of the house. And I'm sure that is effectively what you were referring to.
Yes, absolutely. So that's all. That also brings me to my next question, where we are, where we'd like to know your perspective around the entire AI powered tools and features that are being implemented heavily across different HR processes, hiring, retention, even to measure employee engagement and payroll practices as well. But there's a so the people using these technologies are not from tech backgrounds. That has been one of our observations. So it's easy to buy into a new product, but how effectively you implement it and use it to benefit everyone on the team, for example, is, I think, another ball game altogether. And I don't think a lot of teams have gotten that right. So I think it's very important to talk about these standardized tips and best practices that should be part of this foundation, because everyone's talking about AI across all business functions. But how do you effectively implement it and use it for your particular function, for every particular function? I think that needs to be broken down. And I don't think we're having enough conversations around those aspects. So what's your take on it? What are some of those standardizations that should be, the foundation of any adoption or, movement like this digital transformation part that most companies are moving towards now?
Yeah, I'd say that a lot of companies have tried to use automation without actually fundamentally redesigning their processes, right? And in those scenarios, you end up with a suboptimal solution. And at times, you end up automating the wrong things, right? So, the best way I could put it is like if you take recruiting as an example, most of the practices that recruiting teams have followed really come down to effectively protecting human productivity, right, of the organization as a whole. So, the fact is that a recruiter will only talk to a certain number of people because they have a 40-hour work week. Then, effectively their job is to protect the hiring team and the hiring manager from talking to the wrong people. And so all of the processes that have basically been built in the modern recruiting organization have all been about protecting human time later in the funnel in the process. But what's really interesting is when you start to talk about agents and you start to talk about automation, you have to actually go back to the drawing board and rethink what these processes should be in a world where some of the constraints, the human constraints that we have operated with for decades, actually don't hold anymore. And quite simply, if you think about, effectively AI that is now able to go through tens of millions of resumes, which was not humanly possible before, basically message the top 50 candidates, which was obviously not possible before. And then eventually actually even assess these top 50 candidates based on the folks that respond on whether or not they're qualified for the job, right? All of these things are now possible, and it requires us to effectively redesign what these recruiting workflows look like. And I think that's what a lot of organizations are getting wrong, which is they are starting to throw automation without actually fundamentally redesigning what are the parts that humans do and what are the parts that agents or automation should be doing in this new world that we live in.
And taking that a notch ahead. So, a lot of this is what we spoke about at the start of today's conversation. There's been a lot of negative chatter about how there's like an inflated job count or just too much automation, not being, from the job seeker's perspective, not being able to get their CV in front of the right eyes at the right time. And from the company, from the hiring perspective, uh, too much use of AI. So a lot of good CVs and candidates are just being left out in the open and not really being able to get placed, and not being able to find like the right opportunities anymore. And this negative chatter is kind of like it's going out of hand based on what I've been seeing. So what I'd like to talk about more is, when you talk about this optimizing processes at the ground level, what should business leaders be doing, HR leaders, especially? How should they be upskilling to understand how to reshape all of this internally, so that they are being able to tap into the right candidates? Because if you actually review the marketplace today, a lot of good people with good backgrounds, good resumes, they have everything in place, good experience, the right knowledge, the right qualifications, that they're just being left out in the open. So how can like innovators as well as those who are sitting on the hiring seat bridge this gap? So a part of this is correcting the processes. A part of this is also understanding how to use automation to filter the right candidates, which I think often is also not happening, because when you're using, because you have a lot of a lot of younger professionals or mid-range professionals, they've learned how to hack the system. They've learned how to place their CVs and resumes using Claude or Gemini AI to optimize their resumes using the keywords based on a particular JD or whatever it is. And the other ones who are probably being picked up by these automated processes, but they might not be the right fit for a particular role. And I think there's a lot of that also going around in the global marketplace. So what is your take on, bridging this gap or fixing this growing problem today?
Yeah. So what I would say is this balance between technology and humans in the employment sector, right, has existed for a long period of time. I think it's important to recognize that a world that existed before technology was involved here is also a world that we don't necessarily want to go back to, right? Which is, people applying to jobs using newspaper advertisements, which I know is still a thing in some parts of the world. But it resulted in a world where effectively humans had to make shortcuts, shorthands for how they would actually pick people that they would interview and then move forward in a process. Then effectively the all the innovation over the last few decades, right, about digitizing that entire process, and then effectively over the last few years, really using automation and AI in deciding who are the ones to consider, right? Effectively, each one of these things has come with pros and cons. The fact is, if you want to consider a broad set of people for any given position, it is not humanly possible to review millions of resumes. So you have to use automation in that space, right? The second thing also you have to do is ensure that the algorithms that you're using are fair, they're unbiased, or reduce bias to the maximum extent, and effectively are able to pick the right people and that you have trust in them. And then the last thing is obviously the automation that then drives this towards a place where the right people get evaluated fairly, right? Obviously, that space is there's a lot of innovation happening with companies like us building, interview agents, etc., that can evaluate these people, right? What I would say is the situation, which is the right balance between humans and agents, is still something that is being figured out because the technology is so new right now. I would say the ideal scenario that we are trying to drive towards is more people get the opportunity to throw their hat in the ring for the right roles, more people get evaluated or interviewed, and effectively the right people get hired as a result, right? And all of this happens in a way where the time that it takes to hire these people can be done effectively in a matter of days, not months as it's taking today, right? That is effectively where the technology is going. And if we are able to pull that off, effectively the economies move faster, less people are on the sidelines of the economy and actually driving the economy, right? That is effectively what companies like us are trying to achieve here.
Absolutely. So we're in a very interesting time and space when it comes to the current HR tech innovations. And, HR tech as a landscape didn't exist, probably like little more than a decade ago. It wasn't the way it is right now. And with AI changing the entire HR practice, it'll be very exciting to see how this moves in the future. So, when it comes to the near term, what are some of your thoughts around HR tech, HR, and AI? What do you think will kind of like reshape the market or dominate the market in the coming years?
Yeah, I'd say a lot of the really innovative companies out there that I talk to, right, are effectively doing clean sheet redesigns of their HR function, right? There's clearly a role where human judgment and effectively the ability to make the right decisions, absolutely you need to emphasize, right? And you need to plan for. And at the same time, a lot of the operational tasks, simply paper pushing that happens in a lot of HR organizations, that clearly belongs in the agent slash automation bucket, right? And so what I am seeing is a world where people are really rethinking their processes, thinking the parts that humans should be focused on doing, automating those parts that are the effectively the parts that we as humans don't like doing, the repetitive tasks, etc. And I think a world in which every one of us as humans effectively have agents that effectively have the full context of what we're doing, are able to run these long range tasks, simplify our work, basically the set of tasks that we have to perform on an everyday basis, and actually adapt to the world as it unfolds right around us is effectively a future I see. And what that means for, in the future of recruiting, as an example, is a world where the recruiter will be having more time to spend with, effectively the hiring managers, the candidates that they want to close, the people that they want to build relationships with. And at the same time, they're not going to be necessarily looking at the ATS to try and move candidates forward, right? A lot of those tasks will be automated by the agents that are able to move these operational workflows much more effectively and with infinite scalability versus us as humans are. So I think that is a model that we can all aspire to look forward to, because what that would mean is a world that moves much, much faster than it does today, more people that actually get jobs. And as a result of that, the economies are able to move much, much faster.
Absolutely. Sachin, I think this has been such an interesting conversation and, definitely one of many to have in the future because this is an evolving space. So, I'm sure there's something, something pretty crazy that'll probably crop up in the next 6 to 8 months. And then we are definitely going to have you back again for a future catch up. But until then, we wish you and the rest of the team at Eightfold AI all the very best. If there's anything else you'd like to share as a wrap up, we'd love to hear it.
Again, thank you for having me on your podcast and enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much, Sachin.
Thank you.